funeral service will be conducted by Rabbi Vernon Kurtz, Rabbi Michael Schwab, Rabbi Alex Friedman, and Rabbi Louis Lazowski.
Shir Mamalot, Esayin Elohim Me'ayim V'Masri, Ezri Me'im Adonai, Oseh Shamayim V'Aretz, Ayitei Lamot Raglecha, Al Yanu Shomrecha, Hine Lo Yanu V'Lo Yishan, Shomer Yisrael, Adonai Shomrecha Adonai Tzilchaya Diminecha, Yomam HaShemesh Lo Yakeka V'Yarech B'Layla, Adonai Yishmorcha Mikol Ra Yishmor Et Nafshecha, Adonai Yishmor Tzidcha U'Boecha Me'ata V'Ad Olam.
Psalm 121, a song for ascents. I lift my eyes to the mountains, from where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Adonai will not let your foot give way, your guardian will not slumber. The guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your protection, a guardian at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm, and guard your life. Adonai guards your going and coming, now and forever.
Sadly, today we gather to honor the memory of Rabbi William Fertig. And in doing so, we recall all of the wonderful qualities about him and all the wonderful memories that we shared with him. He was a kind, intelligent man who, at least in my life, for the brief times that I was able to have conversations with him, he was always very deep, serious, lived by his values, and he wanted the best for everyone around him. And he cared deeply, deeply about Judaism. He was a man of integrity, and the world is a poor world without him. I recite Psalm 15 for a man who lived his life with integrity in his memory. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai miyagor ba'alecha, miyishkon bahar kodshecha, holech tamim u'foel tzedek, v'dover emet bilvavo, lo ragal al leshono, lo asal re'u ra'a, v'cherpa l'asa al krovo, nivzeh be'enav nim'as, v'etirei Adonai yechabed, nishpa l'harav v'lo yomir, kaspo lo natan b'neshech, v'shochad al naki lo lakach, ose'ele lo yimot le'olam. A Psalm of David. Do we deserve to enter into God's sanctuary? Can we merit a place in the presence of God? Live with integrity. Do what is right. Speak the truth. Have no slander upon your tongue. Do no evil to others. Do not mistreat your neighbor. Spurn a contemptible person, but honor those who revere God. Never retract a promise once made, though it may bring you harm. Lend no money at unfair rates, accept no bribe against the innocent. If you make these deeds your own, then you shall stand firm forever. Certainly the memory and legacy of Rabbi William Fertig will stand firm forever. Amen.
I read now the words of the 23rd Psalm, Mizmor Kaf Gimel, in sacred memory of the soul of our Rebel Zev and Moshe B'Sara, Rabbi William Fertig. Mizmor LeDavid Adonai Ro'i Lo Echsar, Binotesha Yarbitzeni, Al Mei Menuchot Ken Haleni. Nafshi Yeshovei V'yancheni V'maglei Tzedek L'man Shemo. Gam Ke'elech B'geit Salmavet, Lo Yirara Ki Atayim Adi, Shiftecha Mishantecha Hima Yinachamuni. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Has me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside the still waters, guides me on paths of righteousness, revives my soul for the sake of his glory. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your staff and your rod do comfort me. Tarok lefanai shulchan neged sorai, dishanta v'Hashem and roshi kosiri vaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai. V'shavti b'beit Adonai le'orach yamim. You set a table in the sight of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me on the days of my life, and I shall abide in the house of the Lord forever. We have come together at this time sharing our sorrow to bid farewell to Rabbi William Fertig. We recall the blessing of his life. We thank God for all that was good and true in his life, and for the precious memories which shall endure. We pray, O God, that you may bless the mourners with your compassion, ease their burden of sorrow, send them light and send them peace. As it is written, fear not, as I am with you, be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will sustain you with my power. And let us say, Amen. As we gather here in the Field Family Sanctuary of this congregation, North Suburban Synagogue Bethel, bring a message of condolence from the congregation, from the community, from many of my colleagues who are gathered here, and from an entire Jewish world, to Bill's loving family, to Maury and Nancy, to Debbie and Jonathan, to Sarah and Steve, to the grandchildren, Zach, Nathan, Shayna, Nova, Judah, Isaac, Sasha, and Ori, as well as his companion and good friend Rosette, to the relatives and friends who have gathered here for this sad occasion. We come this day, indeed, to bid a sad and a reverent farewell to Rabbi William Fertig. But there is at least a chatzina chama that he went rather quickly, with a great deal of suffering, and was able to leave this world, as we will hear a little bit later, without a great deal of pain, and with the satisfaction that he was leaving behind a legacy of love and caring for his family and for his community. Today we will celebrate his life, his career, and his achievements. I'm honored that he instructed his family to have me deliver the eulogy, to join together with my good friend and colleague Rabbi Louis Lazowski and with the family members to try to give as full a picture as we possibly can of a person who gave of life for 90 years on the face of this earth. The Talmud tells us that on Yom Kippur, the high priest would enter the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies, and there offer prayers on behalf of himself, his family, and the entire Jewish people. After he left the Holy of Holies, he would stand before the huge crowds who would be thrilled that he had come out in safety, and he would read a brief portion from the Torah. When he finished reading, he added the following words: Yoter mimashe karati lefanechem katuv kan. Far more than I have read to you is written here. Far more than we will be able to say today is the life, the career, and the accomplishments of Rabbi William Fertig. We will all be able to give some of those words. You will each carry some of them with you, some of your thoughts, some of your own emotions, and we hope in what is left unsaid today will somehow be translated to the family during the Shiva period and beyond, so they will get a complete picture of how this one man made a difference, and through a ripple effect, made a difference not only in your lives, but in the lives of others as well. You will hear from Maury some of his biographical details, but in short, Bill was born in San Francisco to a religiously observant family who was concerned about his Jewish education and traveled cross-country to New York City. He went to school at Yeshiva University, you'll hear some of those stories as well, and received his smicha from YU. He returned to California to begin his rabbinate in the pulpit. Not an easy time to be an Orthodox rabbi in California during those days, and so the family moved from place to place. The family told me a wonderful story. We searched both lists, photographs, and people from city to city in order to find what we would call his beshert. And he ended up in Baltimore. In August 1958, he met his wife-to-be, Bryna, and they were married in February 1959. Bill's career took them to Dallas, Texas, to Savannah, Georgia, and in 1976 to Rockford, Illinois. In each of those places, He showed his love of Judaism, his caring support for his congregants, his devotion to Israel and the Jewish people, and his ability to work with all people, Jewish, not Jewish, of high status or of low, and for accepting people who they are and who they were and meeting them at that point. And you will hear again from some of the people who will follow me of some of the stories which are really part of him in those particular places of his work in the Jewish world. He was a constant student of Torah, studying to the very end, and he preached the importance of religious education, of observance, of belief in God to his congregants, to his students, and even to his colleagues. I'll let others fill in some of the details of some of his ministry, but I can add that he joined the Rabbinical Assembly in 1967. In his career, he served as North Lake County Federated Jewish Charities president, as president of the Dallas Board of Rabbis. He served on the executive committee of the Chicago Board of Rabbis, and as treasurer and secretary of our local Chicago Rabbinical Assembly region. I got to know Bill as soon as I came to the city of Chicago, and we stayed in touch with each other throughout the years. I was ordained in 1976 in New York at JTS, and I came to Congregation Rabbi Fertig in Hyde Park. That same year, Bill came to a place well north of where I was, Yamachad in Waukegan. And I recall that both of us, along with some other colleagues, were introduced to one another at an open house of the Chicago Board of Rabbis. Newly involved rabbis came, and we got to know one another. As a newly minted rabbi, I was a novice. He was already an experienced rabbi with many different backgrounds of work in his places of ministry. But we realized that we were both married to Brinas. Interesting, spelled exactly the same way, because there's many different ways to spell it. And that solidified our bond with one another. Each of our Rebbitzins were the support for us throughout the course of our ministry, of our careers, and we would, over the time, spend a good deal of time together, including during the B'nai Mitzvah of Bill spending time on Shabbat in my household, so we could walk across the street to the B'nai Mitzvah of his grandchildren. That never really dissipated that relationship, and it continued until, I would say, of November of this past year, when, even though he was not that well, he insisted that Maury bring him to the gala event, which celebrated both me and Bryna in my impending retirement. He was moving rather slowly, but he made sure that he could be there, and it was probably one of the last pictures. I gathered together all of the rabbis who were present that day at the gala, and Bill was one of them. The senior to all of us, 90 years old, but what a privilege it was to stand all of us with him and him with us as we recognized all of our service, and as I was very privileged to have them present with us that evening. In Waukegan, Bill was well respected by his community. In 1997, when he retired from the congregation, the Chicago Tribune wrote an article on the gala of his retirement dinner. It stated that there were many people there: an Illinois senator, a Catholic priest, and several Protestant ministers were among the 170 guests. He was praised as an ecumenical and humane individual, as a very human in person, down to earth, approachable by all. The loss of his wife, Bryna, in 1996 was extremely difficult for him. And I recall his words as I came to the funeral of the love and the support that she had given him throughout his lifetime. And he felt bereft for a long period of time without her support and without her being beside him. He looked to find a community where he could serve once more, and he moved to Skokie. And I will leave it to Rabbi Zalazovsky to describe those years as a member of his synagogue, as a member of the congregation, and as a member of the community. Bill continued to be involved in the Rabbinical Assembly, In the Chicago Board of Rabbis, he established a chevruta with some of our colleagues, and we became part of the retired group of rabbis. But he didn't really retire. For the past 20 years, he served Ove Shalom Synagogue in Rockford, Illinois. He was a much beloved teacher, preacher, pastor, and friend. In 2013, it was reported the Ove Shalom and Temple Bethel Reform Synagogue joined together in one building to support one another and to create a common place of worship. He was a member of an Orthodox community, ordained as an Orthodox rabbi. He served as a conservative rabbi in congregations, and he joined together in a building with the Reform congregation and its rabbi. Not the typical way of today, and yet the very real way of Rabbi William Fertig, able to reach out to all people, to feel comfortable with them, and for him to be comfortable with all others. Bill's passing was announced yesterday at the Chicago Board of Rabbis meeting. Colleagues expressed their sorrow and their sadness, and all remembered him fondly. He was not afraid to speak his mind. I can tell you when I was president of the Rabbinical Assembly, periodically I'd either get a note or a call or a visit from Rabbi William Fertig with a new idea. Rabbi, you have to do this. Vernon, it's really very important for the Rabbinical Assembly in the Jewish community. I would think about it. Some of them were very good ideas. Some I wasn't so sure of. But I always gave him the time of day because I always knew that his heart and his mind were always in the right place. One of our colleagues remembered that at the last High Holiday sermon seminar, he told us to talk of Torah and mitzvot, and not just about social justice. My colleague, Rabbi Michael Belinsky, who's the Executive Vice President of the Board of Rabbis who was here, said yesterday that Bill really didn't use a computer. He was one of the only rabbis who insisted that he get in the mail the announcements of the Board of Rabbis and what was happening. And yet, stubborn as he was, we all loved him. And we all commented on his studious nature and his love of learning and Torah. Last May, we held here in Chicago the International Assembly of the Rabbinical Assembly. And we always honor those colleagues who are in the pulpit for 50 years. That's a long time. But we honored specifically Rabbi William Fertig, who was an active rabbi for 66 years. I watched the faces of some of the young rabbis and seeing in front of them 66 years in the pulpit, and I saw the dread on their faces. He was introduced lovingly by Dr. Jules Gleicher, the president of Ove Shalom, who gave his bio details, but also mentioned the love and the respect that he earned from his congregants. And Bill then spoke to rabbis. I guess at that point, all of us younger than he. And I asked Maury for the speech because it was a very touching speech. And I want to quote just a little bit of it. Bill said, "I've always tried to get congregants to observe more. There are two reasons I have had for focusing on observance. One, observance as a means of preserving the Jewish family. And two, observance as a means of feeling closer to God. This is what motivated him in the pulpit, as a rabbi, as a father, and as a grandfather and a concerned Jew." Not too long ago, the congregation, in his honor, put together a booklet which put together his bulletin articles. And I read some of the articles, which were extremely meaningful, of course learned from them as always. And he suggested that in October 2008, he wrote that my goal as a rabbi is to encourage everyone to strengthen their Jewish commitment. He did that. He did that in California, in Texas, in Georgia, and in different places in Illinois, and pushed all of us as his colleagues to do so as well. These are the things by which we will remember him in a very special way, in a way that makes his life not only meaningful for the immediate family, but for the larger Jewish world as well. In the tractate of Shabbat, we are told, Kol hamorid ba'ot al adam kasher HaKadosh Baruch Hu sofran marichan beveit genazav. The tears shed by the passing of an adam kasher are so precious that God counts them and stores them in his treasure house. It's an odd word. If you're familiar with rabbinic literature, we know about adam chashuv, an important person, an adam gadol. An adam kasher is an odd term. Kasher we all know from eating, from a dietary laws. It means a proper individual. So what kind of person were the rabbis referring to? Were the sage talking about when they talked about an adam kasher? A scholar, a commentator suggests that it means a man of integrity, a good man, a man who lives in a life in the spirit of Judaism, a life of closeness to family, of service to community, and of reverence for God. What a wonderful description of the person known as Rabbi William Fertig, to some, to Bill as others, to Rabbi to others, and as father, as dad, as Abba, and Zaidi to still others. It is a way to recognize that his life created for all of us a life of meaning, of influence, and ultimately will be remembered by us all. But to fill in the details and to make those moments that we have together even more meaningful, I'm pleased to have my colleague, Rabbi Louis Lazowski, come and offer words of tribute, and that will be followed by children and grandchildren in memory of their Abba and their Zaidi.
I had the privilege of meeting Rabbi William and Moshe and welcoming to our congregational family over 22 years ago. He fit right into the family. Many times rabbis join communities, and the first thing they do is they tell the rabbi what they're doing wrong. Never had that experience with Rabbi Fertig. He was truly a welcome addition to the family. He immediately was loved by everybody there, and I can tell you that his love of learning was inspirational to so many. He used to speak to me and to my sons about his journey from San Francisco as a youngster to Yeshiva University, and how he was originally supposed to attend Yeshiva Masifta Torah Vadas with Rabbi Shraga Feivelman and others. And instead, he eventually ended up in Yeshiva University, where he used to speak of the awe and reverence he had for Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik. And that awe and reverence was shared by just about everybody who knew Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. He always felt that his experience at MTA, the high school at Yeshiva University, as well as in Yeshiva University, reads from Yitzhak Kochanim Theological Seminary, were inspirational to him. He always felt that he was privileged to be able to learn from these great rabbis. He really was fortunate. His chavrusa, his study partner there, was Rabbi Zvulun Charlap. He used to speak about that all the time. And Rabbi Charlap eventually became the dean of Yitzhak Kochanim. So that was a wonderful time that he had. He was in the shir of Rabbi Pelayev. Rabbi Pelayev was a very, very sweet and upstanding person. And Rabbi Bill used to say how difficult the shir was. It was over his level, but I don't really think that was the case. I think he said that out of his humility and out of his sweetness and his goodness. There were some other stories he told me, because he was Gabbai of the main base medrash at Yeshiva University. I won't share those, but they were very funny stories about how his younger colleagues used to whisper in his ears to make the announcements, and sometimes his younger colleagues got him in trouble with some of those announcements. He used to love to learn. He studied with Rabbi Stern, who also, after his retirement, was a member of our congregation. He used to participate actively in the classes of Rabbi Gedalia Dov Schwartz. It was a Wednesday class at the Chicago Rabbinical Council, and he used to talk in learning in the various Talmudic passages with my son, Ben Sion. He used to religiously attend his Sunday classes with Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, the Rav's nephew. And he used to love when Rabbi Soloveitchik would say the Rav Joseph B. Soloveitchik said this explanation, my father explained it this way, but I explained it differently. And Rabbi Fertig would always say, why can't people be straight? Why can't they do the right thing? Why is there so much sinus chinam? Why is there so much baseless hatred in the world? Why don't people love Israel more? Why can't our people defend the land of Israel more? These were common refrains that it almost didn't matter what the topic we were discussing. It would always come back to that, which was wonderful. That was really the orientation of our synagogue and why he was so beloved. I know that he was such a gentle person. He spoke about his deep love for his family, for Klal Yisrael. He was always generous. At times I would want to hesitate to call him up for an aliyah, because every time we called him up for an aliyah, he had to make a donation. There was never a time when he was called up for aliyah that he didn't make a mishper for the whole family, or he didn't make a donation. And many other people admired that, and it was truly something that was to be admired. He knew how to learn about Gemara. He loved learning. He never took Dalet Amos. He never took 6 feet without, in our presence, without having Torah, a verse or something on his tongue. Again, he always tried to inspire people to greater Torah observance, to keep families Jewish, as well as to come closer to the Almighty. And many of this, he told once a story that in Texas, he was asked to see Jack Ruby after the assassination. And Dean Ornish, who was a very well-known physician in the wellness space, how Dean said, I'm not so sure if God cares about my being kosher, but I know it means something to me that I feel closer to God. And that was something that was very, very much important to Rabbi Fertig, the very eminent people that he came into contact with. But he was a down-to-earth guy. He never had airs or anything other than just being a tummy, being walking humbly with the Almighty. I just want to close with a piece of Torah from Joseph B. Soloveitchik that I believe represented Rabbi Fertig. In this coming week's Torah portion of Beshalach, we speak about the Jewish people finally leaving Egyptian bondage. We speak about how Moshe Rabbeinu, how Moses was busy gathering the remains of Joseph to be reburied in Israel, as opposed to the rest of the Jewish people who were busy collecting money and all the spoils of Egypt. And the simple question that the Rav asked is, why was this so? Why was it that Joseph didn't have his children take his remains? Why was another tribe, the tribe of Levi, so involved with taking the remains of Joseph back for burial in Israel, as well as the fact that all 40 years in the desert, Joseph's remains remained with Moses in Moses' tent. And the piece of Torah that the Rav mentioned that really personified Rabbi Fertig was the fact that why was it that we ended up in Egyptian bondage? Because of baseless hatred. Baseless hatred. That we hated each other for no reason. And what was the reason? That the Shvatim, that the tribes resented Joseph and hated Joseph? Because all the forefathers were always shepherds. That's what they did, and that's what they felt they would always do. What were Joseph's dreams about? About sheep in the field, about being farmers. And the brothers said, hey, we've always been shepherds. Things will not change. We are going to always be shepherds. And Joseph is saying to them, my dear brothers, life for the Jew will always change. That's the essence of our existence, of being prepared and being able to change. who were the biggest antagonists to Joseph? Levi and Shimon. They were the ones who ridiculed him the most. They were the ones that wanted to kill Joseph. And they were the ones that their baseless hatred caused the Jewish people to descend into Egypt, into slavery. And the Rav said by Levi, as a descendant of Levi, by Moses, who was from the tribe of Levi, taking the remains of Joseph rather than his own children or his own grandchildren, he showed the Jewish people the message of unity. He showed the Jewish people the importance of being together. And he showed them the importance of your word, of honoring your word and your devotion to the land of Israel. I think when we think about Rabbi William Fertig, his love of Torah, his devotion to the unity of the Jewish people, his love of the land of Israel, that message that he stood for, that he personified all the days of his life, that same lesson is something that by our taking that lesson and making those lessons our own, I think would be the best tribute that we could give to Rabbi Fertig, to his holy memory, and if we can really live up to the path that he followed, perhaps we'll all finally return to Eretz Yisrael. The ultimate redemption will come, and the Jewish people will be unified as servants of the Almighty, bringing light and love to all of mankind. May his soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life.
I'd like to share with you some insights about my father, hoping you can leave here today knowing a little more about him. In the early 1920s, my grandfather, Morris Fertig, came from Odessa to San Francisco to work and save funds to secure passage for his wife and teenage son. After a few years and some time in Cuba, my grandmother Sonia and my uncle Sully made their way to San Francisco. In 1928, my father was born, and he spent his first 14 years there. In 2017, it was meaningful for both of us when my father took me to several of his childhood sites, including his family's apartment, his schools, and his father's store. He had a memorable bar mitzvah, as his modest celebration lunch was canceled as it was scheduled for Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 1941. His family was very focused on his Jewish education, and with that in mind, he traveled across the country by train to the Yeshiva University High School in New York. He spent the next 10 years in Washington Heights, ultimately graduating with his rabbinic ordination. His next 11 years were spent in several small synagogues in California, and at that time, met my mom, Bryna Miller of blessed memory, and then I entered the picture. In 1963, he went to Dallas, Texas, where both my sisters were born. Shereth Israel had an infamous congregant, Jack Ruby, who my dad visited in the Dallas County Jail for several years. Dad always maintained his confidentiality of Ruby's explanation as to why he murdered Lee Harvey Oswald. My fondest memories of Texas and with my dad were when he got his season tickets at the Cotton Bowl for the Dallas Cowboys when I was 10 years old. In 1970, we made our way to Savannah, Georgia. The synagogue was in transition from an old part of town to a new part of town. But Dad spent almost 2 years making a 2.7-mile walk back and forth to the shul. On every Shabbat, he typically logged over 10 miles. As there were some rough neighborhoods he went through, the synagogue insisted he walk with a security guard. Our move to Waukegan followed in 1976, where he spent over 20 years at Congregation Amichad. And after being pampered by his wife for most of his life, he learned to care for Mom when she was sick in her last years. At age 67, he did a great job transitioning and enriched himself and the lives of his children and grandchildren by spending time with all of us. At that time, he was looking at positions for the high holidays, and it came down to Rockford, Illinois, and Johannesburg, South Africa. Fortunately, he ended up in Rockford, and it was the beginning of a long and mutually beneficial relationship. It was the perfect pace for a semi-retired role where he felt a strong connection with the members. This past fall, he celebrated his 21st year conducting the high holiday services at Congregation Ahave Shalom. Dad was very low-key on many issues, but he'd get passionate about certain topics. When it came to Jewish education and continuity, Dad was outspoken. Every time the name of a Jewish billionaire was mentioned, Dad would ask me if he gives Jewishly, and if not, why? Then he'd point out how much this person could do for Jewish education, and perhaps I knew somebody that could talk some sense into this billionaire. Dad was a big fan of almost every musical, provided they were written prior to 1950. Dad was also an avid follower of the stock market, learning about stocks at a young age from his Uncle Henry, who made a living as a barber. I'd pass on my weekly copy of Barron's, and Dad would always turn to the dividend page to see if any of his stocks had raised their dividends. Of course, he learned he'd use computers, so this was the way he followed the markets. Just last week, he lamented holding on to GE too long. When it came to more frivolous matters, he was a simple man. While he enjoyed his scotch, he never wanted me to give him anything over 12 years old, as he felt it'd be wasted on him. For his 90th birthday, he finally let himself enjoy some 18-year. He also enjoyed his soup, but it had to be really, really hot. Dad was very proud of the accomplishments of his children and grandchildren, but he was the last person to share good news or express pride. He was always very humble and concerned about the evil eye. But he did find blessings in simple things in life. Very often, it meant just hanging around his family or saying tefillah with his grandchildren. When we had an incredible 15 months to say goodbye to Dad. He loved his 90th birthday cruise last August into Canada. As we made our way up the East Coast, we made a short stop in tiny St. John, New Brunswick. The community has about 500 Jews and a combination museum-synagogue. We were making our way through the museum with Dad and our tour guide, and Dad realizes it's his Aunt Cecil's yard site, whom he always says Kaddish for. As he sees other people from the cruise ship stream into the museum, he figures he can get a meeting together. As you can imagine, my family was not so keen on the prospect of corralling other vacationers and left the organizing to Dad. 2 minutes later, there were 25 people gathered in the chapel. The tour guide was so touched, he insisted on us posing for several photos. Everyone attending had a glow on their face, as they felt the power of this small mitzvah they were helping to fulfill. This was a simple but memorable way my father had an impact on people. We were fortunate that Dad was sharp till the end. In my last conversation with him, he spoke to me about the miracle when Hashem brings our bodies back to life every day after sleep. He sat me down and read from his tattered siddur and translated it so I'd understand the meaning. He asked Sarah on Sunday to make sure she returned some items to Target. And last week, he made sure I knew that he paid his estimated taxes that were due on Tuesday. I hope all of you did. In the end, Dad accepted his position with dignity and faith in Hashem. We're all blessed to have him with us for 90 wonderful years. May his memory be for a blessing.
Mi ha'ish hachafetz chaim ohev yamin lirot tov. Who is the man who desires life, who loves all his days, who sees good? Who is the man who desired life, who loved all his days, who saw good? That man was my dad. The past few years have been tough ones for my dad physically, but spiritually, he was always on solid ground and had gratitude for each extra day of life. He put his tefillin on with added fervor and drew strength from the Psalms of our forefathers. Each event he lived to attend, each Jewish holiday became a milestone and a new source of gratitude. And my sister will speak more about that, what that was like in his final days. And he often spoke to me about feeling incredibly blessed to live such a long life and to see his 3 children with their own children. As my father, he was my anchor. When I got into trouble as a teenager, he didn't berate me as some parents may have. Instead, he approached me with love and understanding, as well as firm guidance for the future, which fortunately set me on the straight and narrow. Dad's attention to me as a daughter was a constant throughout my life. At age 8 or so, he took me to visit his family in the Bay Area, including his niece Adrienne and his nephew Gary, who are here today. Thank you for coming. When I was 11, we moved to California, and I was Dad's travel companion for the cross-country trip. As I grew into an adult, despite the geographic distance between us, Dad was always ready to make the trip. He visited me in college, on my year abroad in Jerusalem, and many times wherever I lived, be it LA, Boston, or Washington, D.C. When I married, Dad continued his frequent visits and formed a special bond with my husband, Jonathan, who is not here today. He's with our boys in our home in Rome. They both speak Yiddish, as do our 2 sons. Mendere reden Yiddish zusammen? Want to speak some Yiddish, Dad would ask, his face lighting up, and they would chat in a language that I barely understand. Dad even joined Jonathan and Jonathan's father at a Yiddish conference in Pittsburgh. When we were blessed to have children, Dad became a steady presence in the lives of our 2 boys. When I was pregnant and quite sick with our second son, Ori, Dad came to our home in Maryland to help Jonathan take care of me, and our son Isaac, who was a toddler at the time. He cooked for me, made me smoothies, and took me for walks. When my husband and I decided 5 years ago to take an overseas position, Dad was a hale and hearty octogenarian. He supported our decision to go abroad and planned to come visit us in Hong Kong with his companion, Rosette. But his health deteriorated and he was never able to make the trip. In 2015, we met halfway and Dad joined us for a very special Pesach at our rental house in Sherman Oaks. Dad was not only a loving father, he was my spiritual mentor. You've heard from the rabbis today what he was like as a colleague, and I'll share with you that aspect as a daughter. The prophet Micah urges us, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. This was the essence of my father. As a rabbi and as a human being, his highest priority was to teach us to follow God and his Torah, and that family and Jewish tradition are the highest of values. He was unconcerned with the trappings of being a religious leader, his sole focus being the continuity of the Jewish people. In the vicissitudes of life and stress, it's easy to forget what really matters. It's easy to get caught up in petty or spiteful concerns or to voice whatever is the popular opinion at the moment. Dad's moral compass never wavered. Guided by Torah values mixed with old world wisdom and good helpings of empathy and humility, Dad never lost his way. Since his passing, I have received notes from many people who were touched by Dad's kindness and welcome of them. An email that we received I'd like to share from a young female rabbinical colleague. It reads, when I first met your father, I was a new and nervous female rabbi in my congregation. He always treated me as an equal colleague and never failed to use my title in addressing me publicly. He was kind and easy to work with. As an older colleague, he could have acted differently, but he didn't. This was the behavior of a true mensch. A mensch, yes, that's it. Thank you today for all who are here to honor my father. It means a lot to our family. To my siblings, thank you, Maury, Cheryl, Nancy, and Steve, for all of the practical care and company and in-person loving attention you have provided for Dad, especially these past 4 years when I haven't lived in the country. I will always remember this. During the past year and a half, I have been fortunate to have been able to make 6 trips back to Chicago from Hong Kong, most of the trips bringing one of our boys. Rosette, you have always made me feel welcome and provided me an open-ended invitation to our family, enabling us to spend precious time with Dad. Thank you, Rosette, for this priceless gift. Thank you also for the light and companionship you brought into Dad's life ever since he hit on you at that synagogue dance over a decade ago. And to your daughters, Eliza and Alana, thank you for treating my dad as part of your family. with warmth, love, and respect. I also want to thank my husband, Jonathan, for enabling me to maximize my time with Dad when managing the home front. Recently, our 10-year-old son, Isaac, asked repeatedly to go visit Zadie. We had just moved to Rome and were busy with new jobs, but Isaac must have sensed that time was running out, and we wanted to honor his request. I wasn't able to make the trip because of work responsibilities, so Jonathan took the long-haul flight with our 2 boys in tow just last month. This week turned out health-wise to be Dad's last decent week. Though his body was failing, his mind remained sharp, and he even won a few games of Rami Q off our fiercely competitive boys. They did morning tefillah together and watched a football game. Knowing that Dad had the joy of their company in his final weeks brings me a sense of peace. Finally, I want to thank Dad's congregant friends from Amachad in Waukegan and Ohave Shalom in Rockford. Your friendship and appreciation of him enriched his sense of purpose and his life. Mi ha'ish hachafetz chaim ohev yamim lirot tov. May God continue to guide and enrich the lives of all of us.
As you already heard, my father was a man who believed in Hashem in a profound way, and it expressed itself more in daily life as he got older. He came from a European home where his mother was a midwife. He did not go to doctors much himself. He only began to go to doctors when he was 86. And for himself, Dad began to see that the knowledge the doctors possessed had a divine element or inspiration. To his Jewish and his non-Jewish doctors, I heard him express tremendous gratitude for their wisdom and counsel. My dad had great respect for his internist, Dr. Danny Lazar, and our family thanks him for the relationship of trust that he engendered with my father. Not an easy task, given his personal history with doctors. On a visit just three weeks ago, on December 26th, my father looked at Dr. Joseph Michel, an ENT, and blessed him for his help. It was a very powerful moment for all 3 of us. Dad referenced one of the first paragraphs in the Daily Amida, where we thank Hashem for Hashem giving man insight and wisdom. Baruch atah Hashem chonen hada'at. My dad told Joe that he felt at that moment that he was doing God's work in helping my father. He quoted that part of the Amida. He felt those connections, and we felt it too. His ability to see Hashem's hand in daily interactions was a gift he shared. I was honored to be with my father for his last 6 days of life, together with Rosette and my 10-year-old son, Judah. We found profound meaning in what turned out to be his final days. I would like to share some of the time with you. As his system began to break down, Dad discussed the brilliance of our tradition and having a blessing to recite after going to the bathroom, Asher Yatzar. Thank you, Hashem, for allowing the openings in my body to function as they should. He recited it even as recently as this past Shabbat, 2 days before he died. I'm not sure if he did it on Sunday. He died on Monday. The evening Shema was important to Dad. Just 3 weeks ago, when Maury and his family were away, during one of the daily conversations, Dad asked that each day Maury gather with the family to recite Shema as his special request. Dad got great satisfaction that his wishes were honored. And just this past week in Florida, each night, we gathered together in our pajamas, all 4 of us in his room, knowing that the idea of dying during sleep was more of a possibility. And so we cherished that prayer together for each night, including this Saturday night, his second to last alive. Each morning, Judah and I would go to Zadie's and recite the daily prayer upon waking up in the morning. Modeh ani lefanecha. Thank you, Hashem, for giving us another day together. Thank you for returning my soul to my body. He did it. He did this with all of his grandchildren when they were together. Most recently, also with Isaac and Uri in December. Dad and we did not find this prayer routine anymore. In fact, I called him and we recited it together during each of the last 20 days of his life, with this Sunday morning being the last time we recited it together, and he died Monday afternoon. On this Friday morning, he put on his talit and davened from his siddur for the last time, no longer feeling he could don his tefillin. Dad blessed me as his daughter, as has been the tradition, on each Friday night with his children. I received my last blessing that was possible this Friday night. I will miss being blessed by him. During the 16 months of his cancer diagnosis, the Shafianu prayer became a goalpost for him. We anticipated this Hanukkah together, and we recited it remotely as we lit the candles on the first night. But when would be his next Shafianu? We calculated it together, and it would be Tu B'Shvat. This Monday, January 21st. It was only 6 weeks or so from that Hanukkah Shafianu, and it provided us a thrill together to count down. We began to set goals that we discussed together to motivate my father to move forward and looking forward to the next event. When I arrived in Florida, just Wednesday, a week ago yesterday, I went to the grocery store and I bought a persimmon that would have 11 days to ripen, and I left it in his hotel room for Tu B'Shvat. But this Friday morning, I was at farmer's market and I saw star fruit, and a light bulb went off in my head. Let's not wait till Tu B'Shvat. I wouldn't be here either. I was going to go home. I asked for a star fruit that could be easily eaten immediately. And when Shabbat started, I shared my excitement that we didn't have to wait another 10 days. I bought a new fruit that could also be eaten with a special bracha. Would he like to do it now on Friday night or wait until Shabbos morning? He responded he always wanted to do the mitzvah sooner. So this past Friday night, Dad recited his last Shafianu together on the star fruit. And on Sunday, after I wheeled him from his guest house room to the inpatient hospice room, Dad had a few sips of ginger ale. It was his last non-water fluid. And before drinking, he asked for his kippah 27 hours before he left this world, and he said his last shahakol bracha. It was only fitting that during this time, his last 24 hours, the rest of us were davening for him. My sister was davening as she was traveling so that he should not suffer. My brother came to Florida and recited the traditional end-of-life prayers, including the vidui, within 4 hours of his death. I asked for forgiveness, mechila, for all that I did that bothered him. And during his final 30 minutes of breathing, Rosette was reciting a Adon Olam prayer that we are most familiar with from the end of the service. The last sentence of the prayer is, "With my spirit shall my body remain. Hashem is with me. I shall not fear. V'imruchi geviati, Hashem li v'lo ira." It is easy to recite prayers without heart and soul. It is easy to move along and not see God's hand in our daily lives. May my father's ability to share what he saw in his final years and final days cause each of us to pause and consider how we might view things differently. It is said that one dies the way they lived. Dad blessed Hashem right up to the end. Dad, you've filled my life for 52 years, and now there will be a great big hole. I will cherish my years with you, especially the final weeks, that we were very close together as you began your final journey until you left this world, our world, for Olam Haba. I will miss you very much.
My name is Steve Traub, and I'm married to Bill's youngest daughter, Sarah. My father-in-law goes by many names. Some people in his family call him Dad. Some call him Rabbi Dad. Some call him Zadie. He even has the name Bill. But to me, well, I call him Bill. I think the first time I met Bill is about 2 months after meeting Sarah. I came for Passover. If any of you were ever lucky enough to be invited, you know it's a big deal. This Seder was the longest Seder I've ever been to. It must have clocked in at about 4 hours or more, which seemed like eternity. I went by the book, and that's who Bill was. He went by the book, our book, the Torah. Bill lived by it and died by it. He was a principled man, one of the most principled people I've ever known. I may not have understood it or have agreed with it, but he stuck with it. His life had meaning and purpose, and he would be the first to tell you that there was so much we don't understand, but that didn't stop him from living its principles and its tenets. Bill would spend extended visits in our house in Washington, D.C. for weeks and for months at a time. And he got to know his grandkids in ways that everyone benefited from. It was important for me to make sure that he felt absolutely comfortable so he would feel like it was his home as well. We would spend time talking about all sorts of things together. Bill was an honorable man. He would wait for me to come home from work at 8 p.m. most nights and would be sitting there in his favorite chair and would have dinner with me and wait to have dinner with me. Bill was very, very considerate, always making sure that I had enough food to eat. Bill loved to come to Washington, and he would say that he would have the best kosher pizza he ever had. And that was my pizza. We would enjoy it together with a beer. We invited Bill to be with us for his final chapter in life. He unfortunately never made it, but I still have the room ready for him as he declined. Thank goodness. It happened in a very, very quick way. I had the honor of being the first shomer for Bill until his daughter Debbie relieved me. That is the last honor I could bestow on my father-in-law, Bill. To Bill, the most important things were service to Hashem, his family, his extended family, and the Jewish people. The world is a better place. People that came in contact with him are better people, and his family is better off because of what he taught us all. I will miss you, Bill, on a very personal note. We have a very special relationship, you and I. We've talked about many things. You've counseled me many times at many difficult times in my life. I didn't ask for you. I didn't know that I'd be marrying the rabbi's daughter. And you're a very special person to me in my life and my family, and I will never, ever forget you.
My name is Rabbi Fertig, and I am Rabbi William Fertig's oldest grandchild. He was my Zadie. I'm joined here by my siblings Nathan and Shana, and by my cousins Nova and Judah. I'm so privileged to have shared so many years with my Zadie. I loved our regular lunch dates when he would take the red line to meet me in the city. Though the Hot River North lunch spots were a little too trendy and portions a little too small for him, I would always look forward to his thoughts and advice on everything from the financial markets to Judaism to dating. And speaking of dating, I got a sneak peek at the world of online dating when I had the honor of creating and managing his JDate profile when I was just 10 years old. Soon after, he met Rosette, on his own, I might add, and I was off the hook. But whenever he would visit, we would always check his email together, velvilbill@yahoo.com. I'm going to miss spending holidays together, specifically Pesach and Thanksgiving, which we have spent together for most of my life. We always played games of gin rummy or poker. Poker could get serious when the poker chips came out, and when my cousin Judah would start betting a little too aggressively. Zadie came up with his now popular line amongst our family, bet like you mean it. Zadie taught us the importance of family in our Jewish tradition. He greeted us with kisses on each cheek every time he saw us. He prepared me for my bar mitzvah. He taught us the importance of observance and that every mitzvah counts. It's not all or nothing. He was never afraid to speak up and let his opinion be known. When I was just 9, my dad won a lunch with Joe Lieberman at a charity auction. Zadie, my dad, and I flew to DC for this lunch. Just months ago, Zadie reminded me how at this lunch he had asked Joe Lieberman to tell Michael Bloomberg to give more of his philanthropy to Jewish causes. I'm not sure if that worked, but he was never afraid to stand up for what he believed in and let it be known. Despite his diagnosis, Zadie was able to enjoy his last few years without much assistance. I'm fortunate that we were able to spend so much time together over the last year, from the cruise with Rosette, all his children and grandchildren, to our guys' trip to Scottsdale, to going to the baseball game with family, to seeing him honored for his 66 years of service to the Jewish community. May his memory be for a blessing.
In the summer of 2017, I opened up an envelope and was looking at a note from my Zadie. Inside were handwritten lyrics in perfect cursive from late 1948. These were 6 of what he deemed his songwriting efforts that he had kept for 70 years and never once mentioned to anybody in the family, least of all his musician grandson. Although it came as a surprise, it did make at least some sense. Zadie, his dad said, loved musicals and would treat us to